Welcome to Breaking the Barrier, a Western lifestyle podcast highlighting those breaking barriers both in and out of the arena. Today, I'm joined by Chuck Schroeder, a man who has worn many hats in the Western and ag industries and beyond, but someone who I think really embodies the cowboy code, if you will. Thanks so much for being here in studio.
Well, thanks, Rebel. Great to be here. And I was so intrigued when I heard about your program because when I was roping calves, I tore down a lot of barriers.
Yes, well, it's not necessarily always a great thing, is it? Oh, goodness. Well, your work has spanned from the university system to the Department of Ag to the NCBA, National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. The list goes on and on. So for listeners, lay the foundation of kind of where you've been and where you're at now, broadly speaking.
Sure. Well, to begin with, I was raised on a ranching, cattle feeding, farming operation near Palisade, Nebraska, southwest Nebraska. And so certainly grew up in the Western lifestyle and really thought that's what I would do forever. I grew up wanting to be a pretty good cowboy. And worked hard to try to do that. Now, I have to say quickly, however, I grew up in perhaps a rather unusual home in that my father was a very serious animal scientist, was very interested in research and very interested in performance testing of beef cattle. He had a little background in the dairy industry where he grew to think that performance testing was important. And so it was not unusual at our dinner table to have scientists from University of Nebraska, from Colorado State University, from Australia, et cetera. So I grew up in an environment where we were looking constantly a good bit beyond the county line and in our local community. And likewise, my mother was a highly trained concert pianist. We had a baby grand piano in our living room, and I'm the youngest of her 6 children, and one of the few who did not become a musician. She and my sisters tried their darndest to get me to be a good pianist, and I just kept looking out the window at the horses. So that didn't work out. But anyway, I was raised in an environment where politics and religion and science and leadership and education were all regular topics of conversation at our dinner table, and I was blessed by that because I was blessed to just be raised in a place where you're always thinking on essentially a national or global scale, and where I was surrounded by pretty creative people as well. So anyway, so I was raised there, high school rodeo, did all that, played sports, did all the kind of stuff you do in a rural community. And again, always expected that, and my parents expected that I would spend my life on that ranch. So came to University of Nebraska to get a degree in animal science. Was on the livestock judging team here and the rodeo team. Livestock judging team, without question, was a life-forming, if not life-transforming experience for me. R.B. Warren was the legendary coach in those days. I knew by the time I was 12 years old that I wanted to judge for R.B. Warren. And 50 years later, I've just painted his portrait. That's going to go in the animal science department, so it's been an interesting ride. But anyway, had a great experience at the University of Nebraska with some really wonderful mentoring faculty members, RB, Jim Gosey, Ted Doan, those guys just really invested in not just me, but all of us that were coming through the institution at that time, and remained invested in us throughout our careers. So anyway, graduated in 1973, went back to the ranch, where I thought that's where I'd spend the rest of my life, and got very involved in the registered Hereford business. We were in the quarter horse business as well. I leased a band of mares when I was 16 years old, and have been fooling with quarter horses really ever since. So anyway, I judged a lot of livestock shows around the country during that time. Still rodeoed some, and we no business from that point on. But shortly after that, of course, this was during the ag crisis of the 1980s, when just a lot of turmoil in the ag economy and consequently in agricultural communities, as people were being displaced from farms and ranches that had been in their families 4 and 5 generations, and suicides and all just some real trauma. And I came from a family that thought you ought to get involved in politics and the leadership of your community. My dad was very involved nationally in the livestock industry. My mother was a long-time school board member and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, this was part of our daily conversation, and I got pretty angry about the way I thought people were being treated. Rural people were being treated by financial institutions, by government, etc. And I've always been a pretty good fist shaker, I guess. And so one thing led to another, and I got involved in politics and was first named Assistant Director of Agriculture during the Kerry administration under a great guy, Rob Braun, who remains one of the great heroes in Nebraska agriculture and Nebraska leadership. He was just a remarkable guy. So I spent 2 years under Rob, and then he decided to go back to the farm, and I was named his replacement as Director of Agriculture. So it was which was a fascinating time in public service. I mean, this was a time when, again, there was a lot of anger in the countryside and posse comitatus and a lot of crazy stuff going on, and but I learned a very important lesson during that time, and it under the leadership of Bob Kerry, who really drove it, and that was we couldn't fix all those problems, but we could listen, and we could try to be responsive to the way people were feeling. So I spent lots of time in Legion halls and church basements and various venues in rural communities across Nebraska, listening to people and trying to understand what the issues were. And we tried to take action where we could, but we were also honest with people in saying there are things that we couldn't fix and that government had no business trying to fix. So it was a great lesson.
It sounds kind of like your education and your parents were really a springboard in equipping you with the tools that you would need for this role, and just the public service element of feeling a duty towards serving these people.
Yeah, very true. And I mean, and I should say, I had a great debt to pay to the livestock industry and the Hereford business. I was involved in national leadership programs as a college kid. By the time I graduated from the University of Nebraska, I'd spoken in 32 states to largely rural audiences, and I used those opportunities to not just talk about Hereford cattle, but I talked about what I thought were big issues in our society. And old-timers were patient with me and let me do that. So anyway, by the time I was out into the world, I'd seen a lot of the world, and I had seen a lot of different kinds of people. And by the way, had learned to respect people that weren't just like me, which was a critical issue. And I mean, my mother, I was raised by a really remarkable mother. Her family history and politics of Wyoming are legendary. But anyway, my mother, who caught me looking down my nose or being critical of somebody at some point in my youth, which I'm sure I did often, said to me one time, instead of looking for what's wrong with people, why don't you look for what's right in them? Believe me, you will never meet anyone, my mother said, who can't do something significantly better than you. So why don't you look for that rather than what you think is wrong with them, and your life will be enhanced. And I always tried to remember that lesson. And so in politics, whether it was Democrat versus Republican politics, or the politics of the livestock industry, or politics of rural communities, I've always found that to be an enormously important rule and tried to apply it. So anyway, after my brief foray in politics, I had the opportunity to go to the University of Nebraska Foundation, which was sort of a crazy story. They approached me to help with a fundraising initiative called Agriculture 2001 that had been based upon a huge strategic planning effort led by the university, but involving all sectors of Nebraska agriculture and leadership from all sectors, led by Jim Roberts out in Lexington, who became a very dear friend of mine and mentor. And anyway, they had a set of objectives that they wanted to try to raise some money around, and so they asked if I would come help. And I said, I know nothing about your business whatsoever, so I don't think this is even a rational conversation. And they said, no, we just want you to come. And the president of the foundation at the time said, no, you know a lot of people, and we just want you to come and provide some leadership, and we'll teach you. We'll teach you about this business. So I agreed to do so. But before I came to work, the president of the foundation was fired by the board for a variety of reasons. Well, so I was getting ready just to go back to the ranch and say, I don't think this is any place for me. But Woody Varner, who was a legend at the university and then at the foundation in those days, came to see me and said, no, don't be hasty. This will all be fine. I'll help you. And, well, this will all be fine. So I really, with some significant trepidation, but you couldn't say no to Woody Varner in those days, I came to the foundation, and what I thought was going to be a 1 year, maybe 2 year gig, and ended up there almost 10 years, and became executive vice president, and it was just, without question, one of the most rewarding eras of my life. But it was really the first time that I went completely beyond my agricultural borders, because my assignment with Ag 2001, again, less than a year, my role expanded, and I ended up involved with all 4 campuses as well as central administration of the university, and dealing with all kinds of issues that were what would seem to be way beyond my field of expertise, but I had to learn. And it, again, the matter of showing respect to people who did know about a broad variety of issues, and just treasuring the engagement with smart, interesting people in a variety of fields, from Judaic studies to genomics to, I mean, it was pretty fascinating. And by the way, it was during that, for October 19, 1987, was during that tenure when the stock market absolutely crashed. And I can remember Terry Fairfield, who was president of the foundation, and I were at a meeting at the University of Nebraska at Omaha with their chancellor, Dale Weber, making big plans for UNO, when Terry got a message saying, well, the stock market just crashed, and we're essentially broke. The foundation, we're broke. And so Terry came in, and we walked out in the hallway, and he said, well, here's the situation. And I says, God, what are we going to do? Well, hell, he said, I think we ought to just go raise a lot of money. And that's essentially what we did.
Yes.
And it was, anyway, that whole adventure with the foundation was really a very rewarding chapter of my life where I got to work with so many older people who were making estate plans, and I've always said that experience was not about going out and begging people for money. Mm-hmm. It was about helping really well-intentioned people use their resources to make something happen that they couldn't do alone.
Yeah. And
it was, it was a lot of fun. I met some terrific people, traveled all over the country, but it was a lot of fun. And again, not unlike the political deal, I could have stayed there forever. I mean, I was reasonably good at what I was doing, and but some guys came along from the livestock industry that I really respected.
Right, back to agriculture.
Right. And they had this big idea. There'd been a huge strategic planning effort on behalf of the beef industry that had gone on for about 3 years, if I remember the deal correctly. Again, involving leadership of the 6 major organizations that represented the beef industry. And the beef industry was in a free fall. They were losing market share to chicken and poultry in a dramatic fashion. And, people had concluded that beef was not a healthy element of their diet. And they had some real problems, not to mention there were 6 organizations trying to represent the U.S. beef industry that didn't see eye to eye and had different plans and different objectives, which just wasn't going to work. And so they concluded that there should be one organization and working on a single strategic plan to try to rectify some of these issues in the beef industry. So anyway, I was approached about being a candidate to be their first CEO for this organization that had not yet been created, actually. So it was insane. I mean, if I had good sense, which has been true a number of points in my life, if I had good sense, I'd have never done it. But I really felt, going back to my college experience, college and high school with livestock industry organizations that had really given me an opportunity to see things, do things, to meet people, to learn things. I'd been to 12 countries in Eastern and Western Europe by that time, thanks to the 4-H program. So I'd been around, none of which would have ever happened were it not for people in the livestock industry giving me a chance. So I really felt an obligation to try to use what I had to offer, which was perhaps some leadership skills and experience, to try to help them achieve these objectives. So anyway, agreed to be a candidate and became their first CEO, and we put the pieces together for it.
So at that point, you had this experience and this love for the livestock industry, but was there a part of you where your fight or flight was almost engaged?
Well, sure. Yeah. I've been scared half to death most of my life, I guess.
That's a daunting task. We know and love our agricultural community, but with 6 different organizations coming into play, there's bound to be, contradicting opinions and objectives about how to move forward with this organization. Did you feel pressure in that regard?
Oh, every day. Yeah. No, it was, believe me, it was the most politically incendiary environment that I'd ever been in. And by the way, so you've got that going on internally. And by the way, you're also responsible for dealing with Congress and other elected officials. And by the way, during my tenure there of a little over 7 years, we got up one morning and mad cow disease has been discovered. And a disease that we scarcely understood from a scientific perspective, that threatened to destroy demand for beef. And so on an international scale, And so we had that to deal with. We had E. coli 0157H7 that threatened to destroy demand for beef. We had foot and mouth disease that particularly Mexico but other areas of the world where that became a big issue. And so communicating with the public about our product and what we were doing as an industry to deal with things like that was a pretty fascinating challenge, a very fascinating challenge. And I mean, of all the things that went on during the time I was at NCBA, the fact that we came out of particularly the mad cow disease deal with the American consumer having higher confidence in U.S. beef than they had before mad cow was discovered. So that was a pretty big deal. And anyway, and we put all the pieces together there, and actually Nebraska Roots, Don Clifton, the founder of what is now the Gallup organization, who was a brilliant psychologist and one of the leaders in the whole business of, as he put it, studying what's right about people rather than what's wrong with them and getting them to do more of what's right or what they're good at. Don was a dear friend and helped me put together a very unique business structure, organization structure for NCBA that we used all the time I was there, that really essentially kicked people out of their old comfort zones and their old roots and ruts in the industry where they were tied to this particular faction. And I mean, people on our staff that had come from these various organizations and felt it kicked everybody out of those zones and got them focused on a single set of objectives. And that again was a great learning experience, and came out of a respectful relationship I'd established with Don when he was on our board at the University of Nebraska Foundation. So I think it's fair to say, and others who've sort of looked at my goofy track have reached this conclusion that one piece did feed another and another and another, and so it's not quite as kaleidoscope wacky as it sometimes sounds. Did try to build one piece on another, but anyway. And then again, after everybody said the first guy at NCBA wouldn't last 3 years because you had to make a lot of hard decisions, personnel-wise, policy, program-wise, and you wouldn't survive. Well, here I was 7 years later, still there, and I thought, I guess I could do this forever, but I really had never gotten up in the morning thinking I would be an association executive for much of my life. That wasn't my objective. So I started thinking about, is that all there is to a fire? With the old song, but. And so some really cosmic things occurred during that time. I got a call one day from my dear friend Byron Price, who was the executive director of the Buffalo Bill Heritage Center in Cody, Wyoming, one of the great Western art museums in the country. And Byron said, look, I'm stepping down, going back to the University of Oklahoma, where he had been in Oklahoma before. And I'm going to start the C.M. Russell Center at OU, and why don't you apply for this job? And I said, well, mostly because I know nothing about running a museum, and so that doesn't make any sense to me. Well, he said, look, you've worked for boards, you know how to raise money, you know a little about, I do have some art background that we haven't talked about, but anyway, you know a little about art, and it might be fun. He said, I don't think what you're doing is fun. And this is. And so I agreed to be a candidate for that position, but it had to be completely underneath the radar screen. I mean, all I needed was for editorial writers to start talking about that I was looking around elsewhere, and it would just not be good for NCBA. So we wandered down that path for a few weeks, and then I was on my way to New York to actually to meet with Bob Carey to talk about. Bob has been a great mentor and guide and friend to me. So I was going to go visit about, what next in this career. And I'm sitting in the Chicago airport, and I get a call on my cell phone from Victoria Reese, who was with Heydrich and Struggles, one of the most respected executive search firms in the country. And she wanted to know if this was Chuck Schroeder. I said, yes. Well, she said, I want to talk to you about an opportunity to run a major Western art and heritage museum in Oklahoma City. And I said, you have the wrong number. And she says, well, why do you say that? I said, because I said, I know nothing about running museums. I don't even like to visit them very much.
Oh, goodness.
And so I can't imagine why I would be a candidate. I think you got the wrong guy. No, she said, you're who I was supposed to call. And so she said, where are you? I said, Chicago. She says, where are you going? I'm going to New York. Where are you going to be in New York? I gave her the address. She says, you'll be 10 blocks from my office tomorrow. Surely you could take 30 minutes and a cup of coffee and let me tell you about this institution and the opportunity. If, when we're done, you don't want any part of it, we'll part friends. I will have done my job. You won't have wasted much time. And what the heck? So 10 o'clock the next morning, I'm in the offices of Heydrich and Struggles in New York and talking to Victoria Reese, who became a dear friend. And anyway, so one thing leads to another, and next thing I know, I was on my way to Oklahoma City to be executive director and later president of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, the old Cowboy Hall of Fame. Now, I have to say, this is another one of those times that it was nuts. If I was a rational human being, this is not the choice I would have made. But so I had, at the same time, I had offers from both the Buffalo Bill and the Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City. And so I was weighing the pros and cons and trying to figure it all out. So I go to Taos, New Mexico, to meet with my dear artist, teacher, and friend, Renate Collins. I had, for my 50th birthday, my wife had paid my tuition to the Taos Institute of Art to go do a summer session with Miss Collins, who I didn't know at all when I went down there. And it really was a life-changing event when I worked under her, and she had, it's sort of a long story that we don't need to go into today, but anyway, at the end of that session, she sat down with me one day and simply said, you are an artist. I want you to say that. And she said, she put it, she's very German. She was raised in World War II Germany, and she says, you may lie to me with that mouth of yours, but when you speak through your hands, I know I am seeing the truth about you. You are an artist. Say
That's
it.
powerful.
So I went to Taos to talk to Miss Collins about these two opportunities and to help me think through the best choice. So I got down there and went to her home, and I've got this legal pad with a line down the middle and the pros and the cons and the this and the that and the numbers and all this, and I'm giving her this whole pitch. And she finally just threw up her hands and said, stop, stop, stop. She said, you're asking all the wrong questions. And I said, no, I'm not. I mean, we're talking about endowment. We're talking about the board and their nature and their collections and their endowment and blah, blah, blah. Bah, she said, follow your heart. The money will follow you. You're trying to make a case for something for which there's no case. And so there were big differences between those museums. I just will tell you. The Buffalo Bill was very well endowed. The old New York money had founded it in the first place. Cowboy Museum was essentially broke most of the time, deep in debt, and had a lot of just had a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
But I had been there when I was a senior in high school. My dad took me down there, and he loved the place, and said this institution is about our kind of people. And I had never forgotten that, and I just really had this sense that here was a place that really mattered. It wasn't way beyond its collections, way beyond its programming. It was a place that was founded by cowboys. I mean, little kids put pennies in their milk cartons in the early days to make a contribution to the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I mean, the stories are legendary that went on to try to get the place established. And so in spite of all of its challenges, it was a place with a genuine soul of the West to represent Western people and Western values. So I went there, again, thinking this may be a short-term gig, but I thought it was interesting. And it ended up being really the longest tenure that I spent anywhere. I was there for 12 years. And loved it. I mean, loved the institution, loved the community. Kathy and I were certainly very embraced by not only Oklahoma City, but Oklahoma and Oklahomans. I got back into roping competitively at a pretty serious level. And it is the center of the universe if you like to do that kind of stuff.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it just
it is.
However you want to look at it, there's a world champion on every corner. And anyway, I just loved it and established very, very dear friendships there. But anyway, and then thanks to good people, again, that I found I could trust and with whom I had a respectful relationship, who really stepped up to help put the museum on solid footing. And we, during the 12 years I was there, we wiped out $21 million in long-term debt. We hadn't accessed our line of credit for 3 years when I left, and just people had smiles on their faces, way beyond the money. I had a great team that I had the opportunity to put together there. Just a wonderful team of people who were so mission oriented and had Western roots. This was not an academic exercise for them. They really were trying to do something that mattered. And the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum became a place where cowboys felt welcome again, where they felt respected, where they felt there were people there who were trying to tell their story in a way that was a celebration and that was true. And again, showed them the respect that a place with that name on the big label out front ought to have. So it was, I just loved it.
Well, it sounds like you really married your two worlds of your professional side, and then as you started dipping into that creative piece, I'm sure that was just a perfect fit.
Well, it was, I mean, the opportunity to get to know so many artists there that I really respected and still do, was it was terrific. And in particular, Sherry McGraw in Taos, New Mexico, after I'd been there this period of time, Ronnie Green, J.B. Milliken at the University of Nebraska approached me about this big idea, the Rural Futures Institute, that they wanted to try to establish at the University of Nebraska, and asked if I would come and lead that effort, which I agreed to do. I left in December of 2013. Well, anyway, at that same time, Sherry McGraw, who I'd gotten to know through the museum, she was one of our premier artists, invited me to come work in her studio in Taos sometime. And to which I responded, I don't think I could. And she said, why? And I said, because I would be scared to death. No, she said it'd be fun. come sometime. And so anyway, so I came to the University of Nebraska, and we put the pieces together to create the Rural Futures Institute that ended up eventually falling to budget pressures and such that I don't need to get into that today at all. But anyway, during this time, I had started to work with Sherry. I went down and first I just spent an afternoon at her place, and that turned into 2 or 3 days at a time, and then to a week at a time. She and I just loved it. I mean, and it was the first time I really had done portraiture at a serious level. First time I'd worked much with live models, but also working under Sherry and her husband, David LaFell. Both of David taught at the Art Student League in New York for 30 years, Sherry for 20. They're just great teachers, but the core of their teaching is that what we're doing here is not trying to create pretty pictures per se. We are trying to develop an understanding of who we are as human beings. And the better we understand ourselves through art, in this case, the better contribution we can make to the world.
Yeah.
And anyway, that meant a great deal to me. And so anyway, as time went on, Sherry sat down with me one day and said, look, we like your work. We think you could make a contribution to the art world over 20 years if you committed yourself to it, and we'd be willing to help you. But she said you could either do that or you could continue being a grouchy university administrator, but you can't really do both.
That's quite the proposition.
Well, but so she said pick one. And 6 months later, I left the university and devoted myself full-time to what is now Schroeder Fine Art, and absolutely love it. But again, I've fooled with art all my life. I mean, my sixth grade teacher was the first to encourage me as an artist. I won an art scholarship as a high school student, which I never used because I wanted to be a cowboy. So it wasn't that art just sprang upon me at age 50 or 60 or whatever. That isn't true. It had been around. But the truth is, I couldn't do what I'm doing today if I hadn't done the other things along that path. So it's all been. I mean, I guess the fundamental lesson here is that I've been very blessed with people who have entered my life path periodically at key moments and given me permission to do something I've never done before, and then to encourage me and provide me mentoring that allowed me to explore who I really am.
Yeah.
And I think, I just have to say, I think a lot of lives. I don't hold up my life pattern as the ideal for every human being on the planet. It's not. I mean, I've gone and done a lot of different things because I was interested in a lot of different things. But I see so many lives that are squandered, wasted, because someone adopted a label that somebody else put on them as early as childhood, and they thought, I've had people say this to me. Well, I can't do anything. This is all I can do. This is all I can do. Oh, man. Labels.
Not quite.
No, labels are lethal.
Yes.
Labels are lethal. And, God created us not with some label that is across our forehead saying this is who you are. We were created with every one of us uniquely with a whole kaleidoscope of interests and talents. We're not. Don Clifton used to say beautifully, it isn't that you can do anything that you want to do. Don always said, I could not be a PGA golfer as bad as I might want to. I don't have it. But he said, you can do something better than any 10,000 other people we know.
Yes.
We know from research, and that's pretty good. And so, anyway, point is, we're all created with a package of interests and talents that don't fit the labels that the world has tried to create, the boxes the world has tried to create in which we might be placed, because doing that makes it easier for somebody else to organize.
Yes.
Instead, we've got these things, and I just have been very blessed from the time I was a little kid with people around me, parents, sisters, who just thought it was okay to be interested in a lot of different kinds of things and to pursue them and to try to be good at them.
Well, and the labels are lethal theme is one of the hallmarks of our conversation today that we chatted about earlier. But you've really held some prestigious labels in your lifetime. How did you keep from letting those get to your head and keep in that service-oriented mindset?
Well, that's actually a great question, because particularly the older we get, the easier it becomes to say, well, this is who I am. This is what my title is. I'm president of this thing. I'm chairman. And boy, I want to be very careful about not having anybody think I'm not that, because you've got all this, in some cases, financial investment in you. I've walked away from a lot of money in my life, and again, it's not the rational economic man, but I don't know. I love change. Since I was a little kid. They used to tell the story. I had an elderly woman in our community, Palisade, that babysat me a lot. My parents traveled a lot, so I stayed with her a lot. And they say she would always ask, Chuck, who are you today? Because I would take on these characters and whatever. But anyway. I've always wanted to open one more door. Mm-hmm. And, I've failed at things that I've tried, but I've always been sort of fascinated with what else is in there. And so, again, with the David LaFell notion that what we're trying to do is understand ourselves, I've always felt that by understanding that I've got all of these windows in my head. Well, what's in Rebel's head that is beyond talking into this microphone?
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot, but when you can do that, when you can look at other human beings and say, man, there's whatever their clothes are, whatever their economic condition might be, or whatever. If you can look at them and say, man, I bet there's something really interesting in there. Well, I think that's
really neat.
The way we ought to live.
So as you jumped from role to role, a lot of people don't make big life decisions because they're afraid of what might happen or the what ifs. And I'm sure that is scary. But was there ever any grief associated with those big life changes? Being afraid to leave behind all the great things you had to explore something new? Well,
yeah. And of course, as life goes on, I've had a great life partner in Kathy Schroeder. That's we're celebrating 50 years of marriage this year.
Congratulations!
And so she's been with me through, since college, through all of these things, and some of these, when I get this big epiphany, which seems to come on me sometimes, that no, I want to go from here to here, which meant relocating, which meant leaving friends, home, schools. Leave all this stuff behind and go to this next new adventure that has, a lot of blank space on it. It was really hard on her. I was always really just taken with the new adventure. But it was really hard for Kathy. So, I had to deal with what about that? Do you really think, are you so confident that this is going to turn out well that you're willing to put her and our daughter and all this and that, put them at risk? Well, I mean, and I in the end said, yeah. But they were scary. But I've, Luke chapter 12, I mean, Christ talks about don't be afraid. He counseled his disciples, don't be afraid. And, I mean, that's easier said than done. But I have to say, even as I've gotten into the art realm, I mean, I was working on a major painting, first really big commission painting that I'd ever done. I was in Taos and working on this painting of Father Stanley Rother, who was a priest from Okarche, Oklahoma, who ended up in Guatemala in the late 1960s and was murdered in the civil wars there, was the first American-born martyr. And so I was commissioned to do this painting of him, and so I was working in Sherry's studio on this thing. And so I started out, I was going to do this baptismal scene of Father Rother, and so I started out, I was just going to do this very small, just the Padre and the back of his mother and holding this child, because I was just going to make it chiaroscuro and the rest of it dark around him, because I thought that was all I could do. And but I started working on this thing, and Sherry would come in and say, "Oh my gosh, no, number one, lift his shoulders, and he's going to be a saint, for gosh sakes, let's make him look that way." But anyway, and then it was, but you've got to put his grandmother, and they're just beautiful. She's got this huge, just beautifully colored headdress. She's got to be there. Oh, and this aunt, she's got to be there. And so I said, well, but I'm going to make this background all dark. No, she would say, he's in this 500-year-old church. That architecture creates this whole scene. These old retablos that are centuries old are behind you. Oh, you've got to put those in there. But she would every day, she would come to the studio and say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear is the biggest limiter, the biggest lid on your capacity to do what you want to do. Don't be afraid. Trust. Don't be afraid. And so, I mean, honestly, every day I revisit that thought, and it influences my art so much, but it also influences, quite honestly, just the way I see life and the way I see other people. Again, it's always easier said than done, but the truth is, was Mark Twain who said, I've had so many terrible things that I've experienced. I've had so many terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. And we imagine things sometimes that are quite beyond the realities. But anyway, again, I always had a mother who preached that same thing. I've had coaches and mentors through the course of my life at every one of these stages who have, in different ways, in different words, said that same thing. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid. Stick it out there. Yeah. Stick it out there. And I've always been rewarded for it.
So overcoming fear has been a big thing for you, but also respect is one of your guiding values, 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 one of your